Hello guys, welcome back to our second video. Here in lesson 2, we will be looking over development. Um, Most we're going to be covering the concepts of development, and then we get into the theoretical perspectives of development. Remember that this is a new channel, and you can always show your support by subscribing and also by sharing with your friends. Getting the channel out there, whole lot of support. Okay, so before we get into the theoretical perspective, because that's what the video will be mainly about, but we just want to run through the concepts, so that before we go into the theoretical perspectives to kind of give us a little more base understanding of many of the concepts. So, concepts of development. Generally, the term development is used by Western sociologists to mean industrialization, economic growth, and the living standards associated with prosperity, such as increase life expectancy, healthcare, free education, and many other. Um, and so, with that said, development should not be considered in economic terms alone. There should be emphasis on the difference between social and economic development. So we know that economic development is often concerned with the process of modernization and industrialization, moving from a traditional society to one that is more industrialized. You're looking at businesses, manufacturing, different forms of production happening within the country. And so you look at social development now and you realize that social development is a general term that refers to the changes in nature, the social institutions like the schools, churches, hospitals, the social behavior or the relationship of within society. You're even looking at many aspects and factors such as maybe the ratio of doctors to patient within the population, so you understand that social development is development for the people and not just economic base but for the people as well. And so with that said, the measures taken to enhance social and economic development should ultimately lead to sustainable development. And we know that sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present population without undermining or compromising the ability of future population or generations to meet their own needs. Now, looking at the indicators of development, we know that the indicators of development are used to illustrate the progress of a country over time and represent the data collected by various agencies to assess whether a country meets economic, social, cultural, political, and environmental goals. And we have two main indicators, economic indicators and non-economic indicators. Now, quickly looking through some of the concepts and terms associated with economic development. Well, you look at modernization, we know that this is the process which societies go through industrialization, urbanization, and other social changes that completely transform the lives of individuals. So it's really moving from a traditional society to a industrialized one. And we know that industrialization is a process of social and economic change whereby a human group is transformed from a pre-industrial society and from a pre-industrial society to an industrial one where their economy is fully developed. Gross domestic product is the total monetary or market value of all the finished goods and services produced within a given year. And the gross national product is very similar. However, it's the final products and services turned out in a given period by the means of production owned by the country's residents. So it's the country's overall economic input, and both the GDP and GNP they serves as a comprehensive indicator of a country's economic well-being. So we tend to look at these indicators a lot. And the per capita income, it represents the average income earned per individual in a particular country within a specified year. And it provides insight into the average economic status of the population. So we tend to use this a lot for like say whether this country or island is middle class or whether it's a poor country or upper class based on the amount that the average person is like earning as well, and you have to look at factors such as the standards of living as well. Now we tend to not understand completely the difference between economic growth and economic development, and so economic growth refers to the increase in the level of national output and national income of a country. And so we know that economic growth, it's a necessary condition for economic development. Economic development now is the increase in national output and national income, and we're looking at improvements in the social and political welfare of the people within a country. And it also considers things that affect the quality of life and the living standards of people, such as the literacy rates of people, life expectancy, and healthcare. And so we know that economic development is enabled by economic growth, but it surpasses it by considering the impact of economic growth on welfare values. The next distinctions we want to look at are underdevelopment and undeveloped. So, underdevelopment describes a country that has not reached its maturity. And we tend to say that the Caribbean countries are underdeveloped, which what that means is that eventually they can become more developed. And undeveloped now, an undeveloped society has not yet developed, but there is no reason why that society should not do so in the future. For example, we can look at indigenous society or traditional society that relies on subsistence farming. So it's not that these people are something is wrong with these people or the country, just that there's nothing really stopping them. They're doing subsistence farming doesn't mean that they're developed, but their people can eat, their people can live, but they're not necessarily developed, and so there's nothing stopping them. And you also have underdeveloped now society has not developed because it has been prevented from doing so by richer countries. Their poverty may have been directly caused by richer countries exploiting them. And a great example you can use are African states and Caribbean nations have experienced underdevelopment due to historical colonial exploitation and ongoing economic inequalities, right? And you can look at the fact that richer countries gives us loans for 100 years and keeps us in debt is what causes much underdevelopment in Caribbean countries as well. And so in contrast to developed nations, less developed nations display some of the following characteristics. So, as you can, yes, we see undeveloped nations often rely heavily on production of cash crops and raw materials for exports, such as coffee and sugar. In the Caribbean, countries tend to have no manufacturing industries or pretty much not a lot of manufacturing industries to really grow or cause a major economic development or growth. You know, they do tend to have low economic growth rates, and this is characterized by underdeveloped nations, often due to limited capital investment and lack of infrastructure development. Right, you can look at food insecurity as well. Food insecurity, there is famine and malnutrition, and the most being found in both rural and urban areas as well. There's a lack of basic healthcare, and there is poor or non-existence of communication and transport networks. So you see that the infrastructure for many of the countries aren't necessarily developed. And can look into some of the development challenges in the Caribbean. So our first one, we have economic problems. So, we have a dependency on foreign capital, skills, and enterprise. We do tend to have a monocropping legacy within the Caribbean. We also have a dependence on imports and technology as well, domination by multinational corporation, and what else? We have pretty much little manufacturing industries really to kind of help us. We also have social stratification, and that this hinders development as there are no avenues or scope for social mobility within a society, and this can lead um to people um consider themselves inferior or less important than those who occupy higher status, a rigid class structure. We also see population transition. So this is really about like youth population, increase in elderly population, migration, urbanization, and as well. You have political factors, and you know that corruption and political instability. These are some of the things that would hinder development in countries. We have tourism, and tourism can affect the development of the region. It causes tension. It urges brain drain as people start to look at the greener grass and reduces the limited resources of the region. So you can even look at Jamaica. In Jamaica, we invest a lot into our tourism industry, and you see where even during the when came when COVID came and people couldn't travel, you understand that our main revenue earner just got damaged, and Jamaica was suffer. Jamaica, we had to make so many changes. We have to so many deals and agreements to ensure that our economy can stay stable, because we were just depending on using tourism as our main revenue, and you see where that never didn't necessarily work. You also have poverty. It can lead to brain drain. People who are poor, they will want to leave the country to try and make a better life and try to earn money as well. Poverty will lead to crime and violence, and this is particularly in the younger population as well. And so far, we just went over the concepts. It wasn't really not necessarily our main focus. It's really the theories of development, but we just wanted to run through it so we can prepare ourselves to go into some of the theories today. So our first theory will be the modernization theory. The modernization theory is largely based on the view that to develop means to become modern by adopting Western cultural values and social institutions. It is suggested that undevelopment societies subscribe to value systems and institutions that hinder the development process. And according to the theory, low income countries are affected by the lack of industrialization and can improve their global economic standing through an adjustment of cultural values and attitudes to work. And they even talk about industrialization and other forms of economic growth. And let's see the main tenets of the modernization, right? So they say that society is developed through a series of evolutionary stage, and these stages they are based on different degrees and patterns of social differentiation and reintegration of structural and cultural components that are functional, compatible for the maintenance of society. They say that contemporary developing societies are at pre-modern stage of evolution, and they eventually will achieve economic growth and will take on social, political, and economic features of Western European and North American societies, which have progressed to the highest stage of social evolutionary development. They also speak on economic growth, how it promotes structural changes in society that leads to increased political representation and eventually to the establishment of developed institutions. And you have variability in development stages, the where different societies are believed to be at varying stages of development based on their success in introducing the aforementioned elements. And this variation accounts for disparities in development levels across different regions. So let's see if we can look at the stages of development. So the first stage they call it the traditional society. And so undeveloped societies are traditional societies dominated by institutions such as the families, tribes, and clans within which roles are ascribed rather than achieved. Production is mostly seen in apiculture, right? And they say that economic production primarily revolves around subsistence activities as well. The preconditions for takeoff involve including material factors such as capital and technology from the West in form of capital and investment by Western companies. And you have the takeoff stage in which traditional countries, attitudes, and social institutions are replaced with their Western equivalent. Achievement replaces ascription, and nuclear families replaces extended families. The drive to maternity stage is marked by the export of manufactured goods to the West as the country takes its place in the international trading system. Development is achieved in the stage Rostow calls the age of high mass consumption, and the people of the country enjoys better lives. Life expectancy is raised, and more citizens receive free healthcare and education as well. And so just by looking at the diagram, you see traditional societies, it shows you that it has limited tech static society. Preconditions for takeoff. So commercial exploitation of agriculture and extractive industry. You look at the takeoff stage, where development of a manufacturing sector is now is present within countries. So they're in takeoff stage, and the drive to maturity it shows you development of wider industrial and commercial base. And high mass consumption would show where people enjoy better lives. People are living longer. Many of the institutions are improved. They are developed healthcare, improve as well literacy rates, everything, both economic and social development are evident within the age of high mass consumption. Now, for the criticisms of modernization, which is very important to know. So, the first criticism, the theory makes it seems that traditional institutions have little value compared with their Western equivalent. Some societies, such as Asia and Japan, have proved that traditional institutions are important and can exist successfully alongside the modern. Because one of the things, like the criticism that modernization really can't go against, is the fact that they're saying that okay, follow the Western ways of modernization. However, what country really followed it? You know, many people, um you have many ideologies, go different ideologies that exist, and you see there are difference between the West and the East. However, both regions of the world achieved modernization, and it wasn't through one way. So for them to say, oh, it's one way of modernizing and developing their country, they're gonna get heavily criticized for that. um They did say they are criticized for how Western encouragement of less developed countries, elites, has created inequalities in wealth and power, which leads to human rights being abused. Right? And the most popular criticism would revolve around the idea of ethnocentrism, or the assumption that how economic and social progress has worked in certain countries would work equally as well elsewhere. And for us, the Caribbean was never a traditional society. Our people came here through forced migration, through slavery. So we did not experience that idea of a traditional society. We most likely would start at stage two, and currently at stage currently at stage 3 or 4, due to our lack of industry. So we don't have many industries to really give a major economic growth within many of the countries as well. Our next theory will be the dependency theory, and this one should be an interesting one. So, the dependency theory reject the view that the people of less developed countries are responsible for the failure of their societies to develop. Instead, Andre Frank, 1979, suggests that the lack of development is because Western nations have deliberately underdeveloped them. And so Frank argues that there is a growing global system of capitalism where large developed countries such as the United States and United Kingdom, exploit poor countries. These poor countries grew dependent on these large states for market for their cheap labor and goods. And we know that historically this was seen in colonization and slavery, where larger states benefited from slavery and colonization. Caribbean and even Caribbean historian Eric Williams, for example, discussed in his writings how Britain benefited greatly from the plantation economies in the Caribbean, which led to the Industrial Revolution. Because you have to remember, it was due to the plantation system within the Caribbean that led to the industrialization in um Britain, for in the British, in England, all over the world. Other countries, other colonizers, they followed. Spain, Portuguese, all of them, the French, they followed as well. It was due to the plantation. The plantation was like the first mode of production, or one of the major mode of production for them, until they found other things that could help their economy. And so they didn't have to stay with the plantation society, and so we got the emancipation and we were freed. They went back, but they benefited. After that, after slavery, they left our country. We didn't get anything. We didn't have a major infrastructure. We didn't have any industries or anything like that. So that's some of the way where you see how Frank was trying to highlight to us just how dependency has been left within the Caribbean as well. And if we try and link it to contemporary society now, Frank argues that contemporary international trade is based on a legacy of colonialization. Most colonies tended to have political independence, but still had to depend on the market for the West for their cash crops. The Western demands therefore control the growth of these countries. Frank argues that multinational companies uses their investments to exploit other nations for cheap labor, cheap raw materials and new markets as well. And you see that these multinational companies would expand globally and dominate the capitalist world that exists. These companies they do not invest in these countries because they want to build the region. It's really because they want to make a profit. So a lot of times, you have many countries that they would sometimes prevent other countries from investing because what we have realized is that countries will come invest in an industry and say that okay, we're gonna help you. No, during the time of them investing, they realize that revenue and increase in revenue will take place, but many of the profits you realize that the percentage to it the international investors own, those money are going straight to them. And so what happens at that time is that they will come and they earn a small percentage. Next thing you know, they earn more and more till they earn more than the country and is able to take over the business. And he also speaks on official aid in the flow of resources from one country to another. Some countries have a serious debt to their wealthy nations, and a debt that leads to dependency. And remember that we did mention this just then about how countries give us 100 years of loans to pay off, and that keeps us in debt many of the times. It does benefit the country because we use that debt to sometimes improve on maybe our economic structure and so, but it still keeps us in debt. So some of the premise of the dependency theory. It spoke on poor nations, which is the periphery nation provides a destination for obsolete technology and markets to the wealthy nations, without the which the latter could not have to the standard of living they enjoy. So yes, there's a big market here for wealthy countries to come in because if they anything that they introduce, any form of technology that they bring to the Caribbean might just boom to them because they know that we don't have it here, right? We don't have the skills and the expertise here to sometime create some of these things. So when they come in with it, they know that there's a marketplace. The Caribbean is a high marketplace for many wealthy nations. They also spoke on first world nations actively but not necessarily consciously perpetuate a state of dependence through various policies and initiatives. This is multifaceted, involving economics, media control, and politics as well. Banking and finance, education, culture, sports, and all aspects of human resources development. And also the last premise is that attempts by dependent nations to resist the influence of dependency are met with resistance from core nations, often in the form of economic sanctions, political interference, or even military invasions and control. Dependency theorists argue that social revolution may be necessary to address economic disparities and break free from dependency as well. And some other one of our an example we could use is that in the early 1930s, the US invaded many of the islands that wanted to reduce dependency. And so what that does is really it shows you the lengths to which core nations may go to maintain their economic interests within the Caribbean. Okay. Now, the dependency theory, they did provide us with some steps to avoid dependency, a little guideline as well. So let's talk about the promotion of domestic products, subsidizing and protecting industries within the poor nations. These third world countries, this is where Caribbean third world countries can produce their products rather than simply export raw materials. In Jamaica, during when I believe Christopher Tufton, during when he was the agricultural minister, came with the grow what we eat and eat what we grow campaign in Jamaica, and it was really to promote the local products as well, to um to promote the importance of our local products, right? And it did in fact had a positive effect, you know. They also stated by limiting the importation of both luxury good and manufactured good that can be produced within the country as well, so the country can reduce the amount of its capital and resources that are siphoned off of, right? Talk about some governments took steps to keep foreign companies and individuals from owning or operating property that draws on the country's resources. So let me see an example of this. All right, I'm gonna use let's say electricity service provider for the country. So in Jamaica we have Jamaica Public Service (JPS) that provides the country with electricity, and so you might look at foreign investors trying to come in and try and take control or gain some form of ownership within these um major industries, just kind of really siphon profits off of it as well. And so you see where they're actually digging into the country's resources right there, right? He said also that some governments have forcibly taken over foreign owned companies on behalf of the state to keep profits within the country as well. So you see where there is evidence that the dependency theory, the guidelines have in fact been used or been adopted by many Caribbean countries, and it's been showing positive impacts on the countries as well. Now, for the criticism of the dependency theory, with this, you look at corruption is more prevalent in state-owned industries compared to privately owned industries as well. They talk about the lack of competition. So by subsidizing in in-country industries and preventing outside imports, these companies may have less incentive to improve their products or to try to become more efficient in their processes to please customers or to reach innovations. You know, he spoke on how it may ignore the specific histories and development of countries. It might be their history or their problems that led to their lack of development. So this is really just saying that it doesn't necessarily have to be about wealthy nation a wealthy nation robbing the resources of a poor nation. It could be due to that nation that really led it to within that dependency. Within a state of dependency, maybe they did something in the past, corrupt government, all type of things that could lead to development. So, they're trying to say don't easily assign blame like that. They also say that it does not explain other factors that lead to underdevelopment and seemingly blame wealthy nations for the ills of underdeveloped countries as well. talk about how dependency does not always lead to underdevelopment. Some countries' dependency ensures that they become developed over time as well. And so, for instance, colonial powers may invest in infrastructures and public services in independent countries, contributing to their development. However, this development often comes to an expense of exploitation and unequal power dynamics. But the fact is that um, the fact is that the countries do benefit. They provide market for us as well. And even say where liberal social thinker John Goldthorpe 2007 argued that colonization provides positive benefits for poor countries with the development of transportation and communication. And he mentioned that we might sell our resources and foods at lower prices, but they provide a market for us, which is very true, you know. So we have to give them credit where it lies. We can't just be going around assigning blame like that. We have to be very imaginative in the way we think sometimes. And the dependency theory, it wasn't necessarily like that. It was more from a, you would think that it was a Marxist person, or Marx himself wrote this theory. Now looking at the world system theory, um the world system theory was developed by Immanuel Wallerstein. Wallerstein was heavily influenced by Andre Frank, but goes much further. His approach insisted that individual countries are not adequate units of sociological analysis. He argued that we must look at the totality, the overall social system that transcends national boundaries. And he calls this the modern world system and suggests that it is characterized by one world economy, that is capitalism, although it has no common political structure as well. Wallerstein analysis is therefore more flexible than Frank's. It looks at the global system as a whole, but it also explain the changes in the fortune of individual nations as part of the modern world system. And so Wallerstein, he uses four concepts of core and periphery states, but adds that in the modern world system there's also a semi periphery as well. And he even mentioned that I believe a core country like Britain can become a semi periphery, just as periphery can become a semi periphery as well. So let's look at the core nations. Core nations are dominant capitalist countries, highly industrialized, technological, and urbanized. Um, semi-peripheral nations um, include countries that exhibit intermediate levels of development situated between the core and the periphery. These nations may possess some industrialization and infrastructure but still rely on the core for certain resources and markets. The periphery encompasses the least developed nations, often characterized by reliance on primary commodities, low levels of industrializations, and exploitation by core nations. These countries typically serve as sources of raw material and cheap labor for the for the core countries as well. And their personal one that they added was the external area. So they said that external area refers to regions outside the capitalist world economy, including pre-capitalist societies and nations not fully integrated into the global economic system. They have their own economic system. They could be high levels of poverty and low levels of development. Um, For examples, you have the tribal villages like Sentinelese, the indigenous groups in the Amazon, the Bushmen of the Kalahari as well. Now let's look at the difference between the dependency theory versus the world system theory. So the dependency theory posits a static global hierarchy where poorer countries are perpetually dependent on and exploited by wealthier nations. It suggests that development is hindered by unequal power dynamics within the global economy, leading to a cycle of dependency and underdevelopment. In contrast, world system theory acknowledges the potential for poorer countries to advance within the world economy. The concept of the semi-periphery in world system theory offers a glimmer of hope for advancement, providing a pathway for countries to move up in the global hierarchy. Furthermore, while dependency theory highlights the competition for scarce resources as a driving force behind development and underdevelopment, world system theory offers a more nuanced perspective. According to world system theory, development and underdevelopment result from the unequal distribution of power and resources within the world economy. And so the theory suggests that some societies dominate others in the pursuit of resources and economic advantage. This initial advantage is then magnified over time, leading to intensified inequalities and perpetuating the state of dependence for third world countries. As a result, the gap between rich and poor nations widens, reinforcing the hierarchical structure of the global economy. And so the main difference between the two theories is really that, dependency, what it really talks about how countries, poor countries, perfect countries, how they are just underdeveloped due to wealthier nations, um, um, scraping off some of the resources and so on. But the world system theory now, it gives an understanding that yes, it acknowledges the fact that hey, dependency happens. However, the countries has there is hope or potential for poor countries to develop as well. You know, and that is how they brought in the semi-periphery. And so that's really there to give an understand that these countries are able to grow and to better themselves despite being in this state. So yes, they may be um underdeveloped by countries, but they can still develop the country while being underdeveloped as well. Now for the convergence theory of development is based on the premises that as countries develop, they adopt or exhibit characteristics that are similar to developed nations. So countries transition from utilizing industrialization to becoming highly industrialized over time, closely related to the m- modernization theory. In a simple sense, it means how underdeveloped countries catch up to developed countries when they implement the measures to develop. This leads to a global culture in which all developed countries have the same cultural patterns. And so, by hearing that immediately, you would understand that this theory it ignores the fundamental differences between countries. Like, for example, China and the United States of America, which are both industrialized, but they exhibit different cultures, belief systems, and values, but they're both industrialized. So immediately when reading about the convergence theory, you can immediately identify one of the first critics of the theory. This theory was formulated by Clark Kerr in the late 1960s. Though it came several years after the modernization theory, it reflected some of the same thinking. Kerr was influenced by Ralph Dorendorf and Daniel Bell, who argued that there was increasing similarities between polarized groups. So I believe that Dorendorf predicted that as the working class became more affluent, the conflict between them and the capitalist class would diminish significantly, and that Bell believed that countries with different political ideologies, capitalists and Marxists, would converge to reflect more Western democratic ideals. Now, Kerr believed that the more industrially developed countries of the world um, would converge in a single mass industrial society modeled along the lines of the USA. He argued that the difference that existed among societies, whether political, social, or economic, would minimize as modern technology would be the catalyst for prosperity. In addition, Kerr noted that as they progress, all industrial societies would subscribe to mass education and the mass media would become prominent. Science and rational thinking would be supreme, pretty much. Now, Kerr proposed that industrial societies would progress through four stages. The first one was increasing social mobility, employees selected by merit. So, employees selected by merit, he's speaking about the complete removal of ascription. You don't just get a job because you're the son of um this man or whoever, you know. You're increasing social mobility. Social mobility now is easier, and so you look at growth. It's next he spoke on decreasing difference between the strata. Next one was the expansion of the middle class, making the middle class more accessible by the lower class, is what he meant by this. Social status is more meritocratic, seen via income and occupation as well. Those were the four stages he proposed. Now, let's evaluate the theory. Now, while technological advancements such as the internet and international travel have facilitated a sense of global convergence, critics challenge the assumption of a universal path of development inherent in convergence theory. They argue that diverse paths can lead to successful development and caution against prescribing Western models as universally applicable. And so critics also point out that the theory disregards the complexities of individual nations and their unique history and context, suggesting that there is no one size fits all approach to development. Therefore, while convergence theory offers insight into global development trends, it is not without its limitation and criticism, you know. And it's the same thing because, similarly to modernization theory, there is an assumption that all countries must evolve along the same line as the West, and the funny thing is that it's very hard to find a country or a nation that became industrialized or they developed themselves, became modernized by following the West. I believe I remember there's a saying that the convergence theory assumes that what's good for the West is good for the rest. Of course, other theorists disagree, saying that there is no one single path towards the future. And yeah, and that's pretty much bring us to the end. A quick summary: we went over the dependency theory. You know that the dependency theory spoke on how um poor nations, peripheral nations, they are being underdeveloped by wealthy nations, sometimes consciously and unconsciously. They even highlighted when, you know, when poor nations attempted to resist or escape from their dependence. You see where, wealthier nations took actions and showed the length to which they will go to ensure that their economy stays stable. We spoke on modernization theory as it talks about how all societies progress through similar stages of development. Similarly with convergence theory, however, their biggest critic which they can't escape is the fact that you can't say that all societies and nations should will achieve development, industrialization, and modernization through the same path. You just can't say it. The world system theory, which is similar, which goes well with the dependency theory on how yes, countries are dependent. However, there is a possibility of growth, a potential of growth, So it views a global economy as a complex system of interdependent nations and with wealth and power unevenly distributed among them as well. And that is pretty much it. We're at the end. Um, Always feel free to subscribe, like, comment. I want to hear the comments. I want to hear the feedbacks, any improvements you have. I want to hear it. Share the video, get it out there to your friends and peers. Even if you're not interested in the video, just send it out, because support goes a long way, and I am providing a good amount of resources, because remember the reason why I'm doing this is because I realize not a lot of resources are out there for students. So you can go ahead and share it for me. And yeah, the next topic we will be discussing in lesson 3 will be crime and deviance, and that for sure will be an interesting one, because I'm pretty sure if you're from the Caribbean, you can relate to almost everything that is being said. So see you again next time.